Learning how to draw a beach is really fun, and the process is very simple. Beaches are interesting landscapes to draw, as the combination of both land and sea is paired in a unique way, providing you a really unique opportunity to learn how to draw these very specific elements. With that being said, there are many ways to kind of integrate your own unique details and features into a beach scene. So with that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artincontext.org, where we explore various art related topics, and in today's tutorial we will be looking at a fun and simple way on how to draw a beach. Now, the way in which we're going to start is we're going to start by drawing the sky. So using some simple pencils, you do want to make sure you have at least a variety. This way we kind of create more variation or tonal variation within our shading process. But we want to begin with our HB pencils and draw a horizon line. Now, as we draw our horizon line, we just want to make sure that the top section above our horizon line is slightly smaller than that of the lower section. And this is just going to make the lower section seem slightly larger, which will basically be the actual beach scene, the land part of our beach drawing, and this will bring it more into the foreground, allowing that smaller section of sky to seem further away and therefore sit in the background. Now, once we have our horizon line, we will continue by drawing the outline of the clouds above the horizon line. We do want to make sure we are still using a light pencil at this point to proceed with our cloud drawing process. You can form the clouds however you would like. Just remember to keep a good ratio between sky and clouds. We want there to be at least about 40% to 60% ratio, 40 being the clouds and 60 being the sky. So you can play around with the positioning of your clouds. Now, you can play around with the positioning and shape of your clouds. However, just try to keep them kind of forming along a horizontal plane. In this way, they have a little bit more of a naturalistic and realistic quality to them. But from here, we will use a darker and softer pencil where we basically start to shade around the cloud outlines. Now, preferably, we'll want to work with some softer pencil to create these really beautiful and darker gradients. So working with pencils between 6B and 9B is a really good suggestion in terms of shading around your clouds. Now, we want to make sure that as we shade around the clouds, we are careful to not go over the outlines. We want to make sure to have an even tone of shading around the clouds, and also make sure that we are leaving those cloud shapes out, as this will basically be a negative space that defines the white quality of the actual cloud. Now, we can use our fingers or an eraser to start basically smudging around the cloud, and this way we're basically giving the actual sky and the outline and detailing around the clouds a little bit more of a softer quality, which again is a little bit more indicative of an actual and realistic cloud formation. We can use both our fingers and an eraser to even out the shading around the clouds, but we can use both our fingers and an eraser to even out the shading around the clouds. But if you do use an eraser, just be sure to kind of keep a light touch on your eraser, and this way you don't necessarily make accidental negative spaces. But otherwise, you can also add clouds. It's really up to you in terms of how many you would like. You don't necessarily need to stick to the ratio, so this way you can actually use your eraser to make intentional negative spaces, and then apply this process of smudging around the edges of those clouds to give the edging a softer quality that is again just more indicative of a realistic cloud. Now, once you have done that, we're going to kind of move on to actually drawing in the ocean. So just make sure you spend your time on the clouds, make sure you establish them as best you can, and once you're satisfied, we can move on to drawing the ocean part of our beach scene. Now, we will basically start by taking a darker pencil and darkening the horizon line. So we want the horizon line to be darker, as it will help with the depth of field as we start to establish the difference between the background, the midground, and the foreground. Now, from here, we want to start drawing into the bottom of the page, slowly zigzagging lines down the page. Basically, this is going to be a strategic way to develop this quality of the water getting lighter. So we want to keep these marks light, as it will give the sense of the water getting slightly lighter as it comes towards the foreground. We also now want to take a dark pencil and draw a dark shoreline. So by drawing a dark squiggly curved line in the middle of the page, we are basically defining the actual shoreline. By doing this, we are subtly suggesting the shoreline has a shadow as well as it comes closer to the beach. Now that we have a space between the horizon line and the shoreline, we can actually start to add details to the water. So we want to keep the curved horizontal lines within the water. By doing this, we keep the effect of the water within the ocean. We can also make these lines lighter as they get closer to the horizon line, suggesting that they are further away. And we can also make lines more distinct and darker as they come near to the shoreline, suggesting that they are more visible and therefore clear and distinct in their formation. However, we do want to make sure we're spending time on the actual water aspects, and the idea is to strategically integrate negative space and darker moments of shading, but making sure that they all move in these horizontal directions or stay within a horizontal plane, and this way we keep that quality of ripples in the water kind of defining a realistic formation in terms of how waves actually sit on this horizontal plane. Again, because water kind of goes into the distance and it's quite an abstract visual thing, the way in which we define these ripples in the water and waves is by creating these very horizontal dark strokes with our pencil, and then kind of around that we leave some negative space and then proceed to add some shading and working all the way from the shoreline to the actual horizon line. We can also already begin to darken the horizon line and keep some areas slightly lighter within the central feature or the central surface area of that water structure, but simply take your time. Again, you can make lines slightly darker and thicker near the shore, and this will give the impressions of waves clearly visible in the foreground. But now we're going to move on to actually drawing the sand. So this part is the easiest part of the tutorial as it requires very little action. The funny thing about a beach scene is that it isn't just sand, but rather all the different elements together that contextualize it as a beach drawing. So the idea is that we're not just kind of drawing sand, but we're working with all these elements to define what we know as a beach. Now, using a dark pencil such as a 6B or 7B, proceed to shade in the bottom section of the page. We want to shade in the area below the shoreline, keeping it in the same tonal value for now. We can do this by coloring the entire section and then using an eraser or our finger once again to smudge and smoothen out the shaded areas. So when using your eraser once again to smudge in pencil marks and create an even tone, you always want to make sure that you're kind of keeping the touch on your eraser quite light. Again, you don't want to make these unnecessary negative marks, so you want to lightly rub over the entire section below the shoreline, making sure you go over the entire bottom section of the page. Now, once we have done that, we're going to actually start drawing the foreground. So we'll continue by creating a foreground for our beach drawing by drawing a grassy area with a tree. Now, there are many ways to obviously give our beach scenario more detail in terms of features and how we'd like to. That's completely up to you, but in this particular tutorial we'll look at giving it a very specific detail, and that is how to draw a tree and a grassy area. Now, to give a sense of depth, we want to make the foreground the darkest, so we can start by drawing a diagonal line across the page with our darkest pencil. Now, from there we want to color in the section below the diagonal line. We want to color it in quite dark, making sure there is a distinct contrast between the foreground and the background. Now, once the bottom space below the diagonal line is colored in, we can start to add strokes along the top edge. We want to add lines along the top of the colored in section in all sorts of directions to create the effect of grass. So from there we can begin to add a tree to our beach drawing, which we can begin by drawing two parallel lines on the side of the page. We just want to make sure that the base is slightly thicker than that of the body of the tree, so from there we can actually proceed to color the tree completely with our dark pencils. Now, this is a very unique way of kind of adding a tree to our beach drawing, but again, when we're creating visual qualities or features that sit in the foreground, you always want to make sure that they are slightly darker, especially within this kind of drawing medium or representation of a beach drawing. So from there we can color the tree completely with a dark pencil, and then we can add foliage to the palm tree by drawing strokes of lines that kind of have an arcing downward shape from the top of that tree. And then from there we can add little strokes to each arced line connected to the top of the tree to kind of suggest leaves and little sprouts within the leaves. So we can add as many of these palm leaves as we would like. We want to make sure that the tree and grass and foreground are all in the same kind of tonal value. Keeping these features dark gives a sense of depth to our beach drawing and creates that distinction between the foreground and the background. But again, this is a very unique way of drawing a beach. It's also just giving you the basic idea of how to establish a background, a midground, and a foreground through these very specific techniques with pencil. There are many ways to kind of integrate these features, deviate from them, and ultimately alter them to suit your interest in terms of what you'd like to add to your beach. But otherwise, guys, that's a general process of how to draw a beach with some pencils. Very simple, very fun, very versatile. Again, when you're drawing a beach scene, you're learning how to draw a variety of different elements, and that is particularly what is the main outcome of this. You can kind of see how to form clouds that can be used in your own landscapes. we look at a way in which we can also form water through these kind of zigzaggy shaded lines that form along a horizontal plane, and then ultimately how various tonal values can create a distinction between a background, a midground, and a foreground, especially with how we darken the details in the foreground. If you did like this video, please let us know in the comments section below. We love to make these fun little drawing exercises and share them with you. Hopefully there are some key ideas and concepts you can take away from this and can be used in your own work. But otherwise, thanks again for tuning in. If you did like the video, please also give us a thumbs up. Please do subscribe. This helps us to grow the channel, which ultimately enables us to make more art related content for you guys. But that is it for today. Thanks for tuning in once again. Until next time, cheers.